Sean Cola with GrowingYourGreens.com. Today I have another exciting episode for you. Many of you guys saw that last episode, where actually I spoke at the March Against Monsanto in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I know you guys had a lot of positive comments, but also there's, a few negative comments, and it saddens me that some people still don't know in 2015 what exactly a GMO is, if it's good, if it's bad, if it's indifferent, if they should be here, if they shouldn't be here. I mean, this is almost like either right and wrong, good and bad, good against evil, I don't know, bad against good, Democrat versus Republican. Like, people are so excited. It's either you're on this side, you're on the far right, or you're on the far left, and there's no middle ground, right? Maybe the middle ground is just require GMO labeling. And if you think it's so good, label it and buy it and be happy with it. And if you don't want it, then don't buy it. I think the main thing for me about GMOs is people need to have a choice, right? People need to have a choice, and that's the strongest thing about me. Like, you wouldn't knowingly eat poisoned food. I mean, back in the times of England, they had a joker or a jester or I don't know, somebody that tasted the food to make sure it wasn't poisoned before the guy would eat it. And if things are poisoned, we should know about it. It should be labeled, and that's if, right? Big if. So because of your guys' comments, and both the good and the bad comments, I kind of want to get more light on this GMO topic because it does affect not only us home gardeners, but everybody that's living on the planet in this day and age. So I thought I'd probably get the #1 consumer advocate for non-GMO foods, non-GMO products, and who has done thousands of hours of research about this topic on the show today. I brought him literally to my backyard garden, and I got the chair set up over there. We're going to go ahead and sit down and interview him in a second. His name is Jeffrey Smith. He wrote a book, Seeds of Deception, and had a movie, Genetic Roulette, that I would encourage you guys to check out. I'll put links. I believe probably the video's on YouTube now. You could check it out down below and just educate yourself about the GMOs, right? I mean, the proponents of GMOs primarily are the companies that stand to gain a benefit from the GMOs, right? Because business, it's not about feeding the world or helping people. Let's get real. Business is there to make a profit. I mean, I majored in business, man. It's all about the bottom line, making money and all this stuff. So, I mean, they're doing their job. I could appreciate that, but at the same time, I want some responsibility and minimally labeling. And so in this episode, you're going to get to learn about some of the things about GMOs by one of the leading guys that's done probably the most research on the planet about this, in my opinion. And I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and head over and talk with Jeffrey Smith. So now I'm with Jeffrey Smith. He's the executive director of the Institute for Responsible Technology. So Jeffrey, thanks for coming to my garden today and being here to answer some of the questions for my viewers today. So probably the first question is, what's your background and why do you know so much and why did you decide to know so much about GMOs, like more than anybody that I've ever met?
Well, in 1996, I went to a lecture by a genetic engineer who was kind of blowing the whistle, saying, I know genetic engineering very well. He was an NIH award-winning scientist, and he said the technology is not ready. It's not ready to be put into food. It's not ready to be put outdoors. That the primary result of genetic engineering is surprise side effects, and the technology could never at that time be predictable and safe, let alone without any requirements by the FDA in place. So this was just before the seeds were being planted widely in the state that I was living in Iowa, and I realized no one else knew about it, and we needed to get the word out. And I have a background in communications and education and marketing, and so I decided, well, maybe I'll help the scientists translate the science into English so it can end up in the hands of decision makers, and I'll throw a little time in there, and that little time has turned into 19 years so far, visiting 42 countries, interviewing dozens and dozens of scientists and doctors, as well as thousands of people who've removed GMOs from their diet and noticed incredible changes in their health. And so I've come up with 2 books and 3 movies and countless testimonials before government bodies, etc., and I just sort of ended up here.
Wow, well, cool. Thanks for being here today. So first of all, for all my viewers that don't know, because I know there's still a lot of confusion about what GMO even stands for. What does it stand for, and actually what exactly is it?
Well, GMO means genetically modified organism. If you look around this garden, you'll see that these plants reproduce through sexual reproduction, where the mother and father elements combine and there's contribution from both sets of genes. Let's say you wanted to create a tomato that had properties that a pig had. You can put a pig and a tomato in a room and lower the lights and play some music and serve some wine, but you're not going to end up with a offspring of little tomato piglets. So what this does is it takes a gene or two or three from some species in some kingdom and forces it into the DNA of another species, possibly in another kingdom. And the GMOs that are on the market, soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa, those are the 6 major ones. They're all engineered primarily not to die when sprayed with an herbicide, most popularly Roundup. So you have Roundup-ready versions of each of these. And you also have zucchini, yellow squash, and papaya, which are viral-resistant varieties which can resist certain viral infections. But the primary reason is to allow the fields to be sprayed with Roundup, and then the secondary for corn and cotton plants, it produces its own toxic insecticide to break open the stomach of certain insects to kill them. So by eating GMOs, we're eating the insecticide and the herbicide and the dramatically mutated DNA. When I say dramatically mutated, the other side, the biotech industry thinks, or doesn't think, they pretend that it's a very precise technology, and you think in terms of splicing a gene neatly into the DNA. Well, suppose you wanted to turn this plant into a built-in insecticide. You take a gene from Soilobacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis, you make millions of copies of the gene. Actually, first you put an on switch from virus and an off switch from some other kingdom, and then you make millions of copies and put it into a gun and shoot the gun into a plate of millions of cells, and then clone the cells into a plant, or you infect the cells with bacteria and then clone them into a plant. Now, the process of insertion plus cloning creates massive collateral damage. 2 to 4% of the DNA is different. Hundreds, even 1,000 genes can change our levels of expression. So not only are you eating the toxic insecticide, the toxic herbicide, but you're also maybe eating higher levels of toxins, allergens, and carcinogens produced from within the plant itself.
Wow. So if that's what a GMO is, like it's genetically modified organism, haven't gardeners and people and agricultural industries and societies for hundreds or thousands of years actually been modifying plants?
Modifying plants, absolutely. Saving the best seeds, creating crosses, modifying the gene pool through human intelligence in conjunction with the nature of nature, sure. But not taking individual genes or several genes and shooting it with a gun. No, that's different.
So this is a lot different than like hybridized seeds and seeds like heirloom seeds and all this stuff. This is completely different, right?
It's not only completely different, but the experts at the FDA made it absolutely clear. They said in a memo that was from the compliance officer, Linda Call, in 1992, summarizing all the research and work done by all the experts at the FDA that were supposed to look at GMOs. He said, the process of genetic engineering and traditional breeding are different, and according to the technical experts at the agency, they lead to different risks. Now, the next thing that was said was very telling. She said, by trying to force the conclusion that there's no difference is like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. Why was she saying that? Why was she saying to the political appointees in charge of the FDA, by trying to force the conclusion? It's because they were doing just that. In the policy which came out, ignoring Linda Call, ignoring all the technical experts at the agency, they claimed that the agency wasn't aware of any information showing that GMOs were significantly different, therefore no safety studies were needed, no labeling was needed. It was a lie. It was exactly the opposite of the consensus of the scientists working at the FDA. It was against the scientists working around the world who understood the process of genetic engineering and the unpredicted side effects. But it is official US policy, and that's why no safety studies are needed. And so the biotech industry grabbed onto this concept of no difference, which was a lie, and they propel that into the psyche with millions and millions of dollars saying, oh, GMOs are just an extension of natural breeding. We're doing the same thing we've been doing for hundreds of years. And they convince well-meaning scientists who have no idea of the truth that that's the case.
So it's completely a lie that it's the same because it's completely different.
it is completely different. The type and amount of mutations are different. What goes in there is different. You're forcing the gene that's in there to turn on and function 24/7, which can rob the cell of different energy that would be available to it, and you can change the biochemical balance due to the overproduction of something. You have antibiotic-resistant diseases. You end up with bacterial genes that can transfer to gut bacteria more readily than other genes. There's all sorts of things that can occur generically that are different, and then you have amino acids that are produced in different organisms, so they may be folded differently or have different molecular attachments. All of this can turn a harmless protein into a potentially deadly one. You have the RNA figure, which is the RNA that gets produced from that inserted gene. It's getting very technical, but the key is this. The most common effect of genetic engineering is surprise side effects. That's what I learned in 1996, and it's still the case.
Wow, and most people still don't know that today. It's quite unfortunate. So what are some of the combinations of crosses that they've done, like different species to make different kinds of crops?
Well, here's where you can't make this stuff up. They took spider genes and inserted them into goats. It's a concept you don't want to think about, in the hopes that they can milk the goat to get spiderweb protein to make bulletproof vests. They've taken human genes and put it into corn to make spermicide. They've turned pigs into footballs with cowhides. They've done all sorts of combinations, some of which we know about, most of which we don't.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. And what they did one time, they did tomatoes and fish, right?
Oh yeah, the fish has an antifreeze gene that allows it to survive in cold temperatures in the Arctic, and so the tomato or the strawberry now has the antifreeze gene. That was never commercialized because it was bitter, but it was intended. It was intended.
Wow. So a big question for me, Jeffrey, is, I grow the majority of my vegetables year-round. I also got out of the whole industrialized processed food system 20 years now. This is my 20-year celebration of getting out of the food system and eating a whole plant food-based, non-GMO food. And I was eating non-GMO before they even had GMOs, luckily enough, so I'm safe in my opinion. But what are some common foods that are in the supermarket today that Americans may be purchasing and eating, and they're unknowingly getting GMOs because they are not currently labeled?
Well, the good news is the produce section is relatively safe. The produce section might have 5 different GMOs in them. It would have edamame made from soy, corn on the cob, zucchini and yellow squash might be GMO, and papaya if it's from Hawaii or China. The rest of it is non-GMO at this point. Potatoes and apples were recently approved, but not yet on the market in 2015. Then you have the meats. We're going around the south side of the supermarket. Okay, the meats will be not from genetically engineered animals, but from animals that have been fed genetically engineered feed. The soy, corn, cottonseed oil, cottonseed meal, canola meal, sugar beet pulp, and alfalfa are all used as animal feed. They're all genetically engineered, and that does change the structure and function of the animal's physiology, for sure. It's been published, peer-reviewed, it's verified, and we don't know the impact on humans. I have plenty of anecdotal stories from individuals and their doctors that it does have an impact, but not a single research paper has been published on the effects of eating an animal or eating milk from an animal that's been eating GMOs. If you go to the center part of the supermarket, boxed and canned, most of it will have a derivative of soy or corn or cottonseed oil or canola oil or sugar from sugar beets or from animals that are fed GMOs, or dairy from animals fed GMOs or animals injected with bovine growth hormone. So all that's genetically engineered. If you put it all together, maybe 80% of the products in the supermarket, maybe 90% of the processed packaged foods have at least some, even a tiny amount of a GMO. And Americans eat maybe 190 pounds of corn a year. Most of it's genetically engineered, 90% or more. So we eat our weight in GMOs by the end of the year. So it's not a pretty sight.
Well, I'm one person that's not eating any GMOs.
Except us.
According to, what I know, doing the best I can. But so are there any studies on what it does to the animals when the animals eat the GMO foods?
Yeah, as of 2009, one medical organization looked at the animal feeding studies and found gastrointestinal problems, immune system problems, reproductive problems, organ damage, accelerated aging, dysfunctional regulation of cholesterol and insulin, and declared it was a hazard. They said every doctor should prescribe non-GMO diets to every patient, the government should put a moratorium on it. The government ignored them, but a lot of doctors did not. Thousands of doctors are prescribing non-GMO diets. And since 2009, there's also been high levels of infant mortality, some birth defects found, multiple massive tumors, hormonal damage, a whole series of things, plus reports of people that have seen the animals in the laboratory between the GMO and the non-GMO. Animals that are fed the GMO tend to be more aggressive and have more antisocial behavior. Now, if you take the experience of the animals and you translate it into human experience, we see that when individuals get off of GMOs, according to them and their doctors, and I've talked to thousands, they get better from the same categories of diseases that the lab animals are suffering from. Same with livestock, pigs and cows, they get better from the same category. Same with dogs. These same categories are on the rise in the US population since GMOs were introduced. And I don't think that's a coincidence. It is correlation, but I think it's based on causation. And if you look at the two main toxins in GMOs, the Roundup and the Bt toxin, and the process of genetic engineering, that could fully explain the variety of these diseases on the rise, from deaths from senile dementia, stroke, hypertension, obesity. You have diabetes and autism, you have all sorts of cancers and all sorts of gastrointestinal problems, and all sorts of mood and behavior problems, from insomnia and anemia and schizophrenia and ADHD, etc. All of that is laid out and shows a tight correlation either between GMO expansion or the use of glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, which is sprayed on most GMOs.
So let's talk about the glyphosate, because, you know, as gardeners, hopefully guys are not using any glyphosate. I mean, I know plenty of gardeners and farmers that, yeah, I grow organic, but I spray glyphosate in the rows to keep the grass down. You know, what are some of the challenges with the glyphosate?
Well, glyphosate being the active ingredient in Roundup, you can use them interchangeably, although they're not interchangeable. Glyphosate is toxic, highly toxic, and yet Roundup can be as much as 1,000 times more toxic.
Wow.
Because it has these supposedly inert ingredients that are not inert at all. There's at least one ingredient that's 10,000 times more toxic than glyphosate. So glyphosate was just declared by the World Health Organization as a probable carcinogen. Since then, it's been banned in many countries. It's been banned in Sri Lanka. It's been banned in, declared a carcinogen in Denmark. It was banned for commercial or for home use in Amsterdam or in Holland already. It was 30,000 physicians in Argentina are calling for its ban. The federal prosecutor in Brazil is calling for its ban there. It was just banned by the government of Colombia to spray for the cocoa plantation eradication, etc., etc. And it should be banned here. People should not use it. It's been banned in some German stores. They won't allow it. It was a Swiss chain that just banned it today. So it's on its way out for the people that know about it. And just to give you more motivation, let me tell you what it does beyond probably causing cancer. When they say probably causing cancer, I say it definitely causes cancer in animals, it definitely causes mutations in human DNA, which can lead to cancer, and it definitely, when it's used in the farm, is associated with spiked incidence of cancers. And the reason they didn't call it a cancer, the definite cancer, is because they didn't have any human studies to draw from, just the epidemiological evidence in the lab studies and the extrapolation from the animal studies. It also creates birth defects, and that's also verified through the through a pathway.
All right.
And birth defects are found both in animals and in humans associated with glyphosate. It also causes endocrine disruption at even tiny levels, parts per trillion, which can also lead to cancer, as well as changes in our estrogen, testosterone levels, and other problems. It also kills beneficial gut bacteria. It's a patented antibiotic, which can throw the balance of the gut bacteria off. Dysbiosis in gut bacteria is linked to leaky gut and many other diseases. It's linked to autism, etc. It also blocks the bacteria's ability to produce the precursors to serotonin, dopamine, and melatonin, which is tryptophan and others. So you end up with all sorts of mood issues and insulin regulation issues and insomnia and possibly Parkinson's. So you have a whole slew of issues associated with Roundup. In addition, it blocks a very important pathway, the P450 cytochrome pathway, which allows the liver to detox and also allows the body to produce vitamin D. And these are just some of the problems associated with it. And what it does, it's a very simple molecule, deceptively simple, but grabs onto metals and minerals, making them unavailable. Those metals and minerals are absolutely essential for the functioning of certain metabolic pathways, certain bacteria, hormonal production, etc. So it's a massive disruption, and there are graphs that link glyphosate increase with all sorts of diseases, and we think it's based on these factors.
Wow, I mean, that's what it does, and how it kills the plants is it basically makes the plant not able to uptake the minerals, and that's basically, if it's inside you, it sucks out your minerals, you know? So that's what they're kind of teaching, is suck out the minerals to kill plants. I'm actually teaching add trace minerals, because all these trace minerals, you know, I had 70 to 90 trace minerals in my garden. That's what I recommend to you guys too, because all these minerals are like unstudied. They don't know what a small amount of this, small amount of that. There's pathways and enzymes that break these down that could give you extra immunity and all kinds of crazy stuff for the plant, but also for us, right? And even conventional, even organic farming are not adding these very important trace minerals in the garden, in the farms, you know, that's growing your guys' food. So that's why I say you guys need to grow your own.
And for the meat eaters, you know, most of the meat in the United States comes from animals that have been grazing or eating GMOs. So that means that the animals are also nutrient deficient. They have mineral deficiencies and vitamin deficiencies, and there's a widespread universal epidemic in the United States for livestock from manganese and things like that, which binds very tightly with glyphosate. So we're eating weak and sick animals, we're eating weak and sick plants, both from glyphosate, and we're eating residues of glyphosate, which, as you say, binds with the minerals in us, making them unavailable. And that is the basis for so many diseases.
Wow. So, I mean, there's still a lot of confusion. Just one of my videos, past videos, actually, one of my viewers commented. I want to read the comment on the show today. Let's see here. There's nothing wrong with GMOs. It is not poison. You have been eating them all your life and are eating them now. This GMO nonsense is way out of hand. 80% of what you buy at this grocery store is GMO. So at least he got one thing right. The 80% of what you buy at the grocery store is GMO. But
or has it in it. Yeah.
Or has it in it. So, Jeffrey, what would you say about GMO is not poison and you've been eating them all your life?
Well, the first GMO to be commercialized for food was in 1994. So that was the tomato taken off the market within 3 years. Those that have been born since 1996, when soy and corn were introduced, yeah, you've been eating it all your life. But I was born before that, so it's not
me
true.
Me too.
80% of the stuff is GMO. Actually, only 9 food crops are genetically engineered, but they're in 80% of the stuff in the supermarkets. So I would say there's a partial correct there. I'll give them a B. You know, check your facts. The fact that it's not poison, well, if you look at what the scientists said at the FDA, they said GMOs could increase allergens, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems. So you may, and they also said about poisons, the Division of Toxicology said it could increase existing toxins, create new toxins, bioaccumulate toxins from the environment. The Center for Veterinary Medicine said that eating the milk and meat from animals fed GMOs could have unique risks, and what they probably meant was bioaccumulation of toxins. What we do know is that in spite of Monsanto's claims, glyphosate does bioaccumulate. As you can tell from the amount of it that's found in breast milk, it does bioaccumulate in mammal tissue, and we eat the mammals, and so there could absolutely be poison in the animals that are fed GMOs. And of course, most GMOs are designed as a platform to deliver poison. Either they produce an insecticide or they're sprayed with herbicide. And so 99% of all the GMOs are in fact poison delivery vehicles. Now, if you just took the GMO itself without that, you still end up with the higher levels of allergens and toxins. In fact, Monsanto's soy has up to 7 times the amount of a known soy allergen, and Monsanto's corn has a new allergen that's never been in corn before, part of the background noise. So whether you call it a poison or a toxin or an allergen or something unusual, unfortunately is misinformed, but it's probably disinformed. You see, people who are very well-meaning and sometimes who have been studying science all their lives are not getting the direct information. And if you look at the research done by the industry, and I've done that with many, many scientists in my second book, Genetic Roulette, the documented health risks of genetically engineered foods, I have a 41-page section all about how the industry rigs its research, how they use tobacco science, how they have bad science down to a science to hide the evidence about the dangers, and they project that false information to the world, and the mainstream media buys it, and their advertisers want them to buy it because their advertisers largely use GMOs, and so we end up being fed not only the GMOs but also a bucket of lies at the same time, and so well-meaning people can be misinformed. So I have compassion for those, not for the liars, but the lied to. And realize that, you know, what we don't know may in fact hurt us.
Wow, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, I was so glad when I started, you know, eating non-GMO, whole plant-based foods, diet, before the GMOs came around. And that's what I encourage you guys to do, increase the amount of fresh produce that you guys eat and grow as much of it as you possibly can, and get away from all the processed foods and all the animal foods and all the GMO foods. I'm not really an advocate of those guys, and I believe, they may cause harm, and I definitely do not put them in my body and wouldn't recommend that to any of my family or friends. Another quote actually I got from another viewer, Jeffrey, was, I disagree with Roundup Ready technology, but GMOs are not bad. Science are trying to create crops that use water and nitrogen more efficiently. God gave us tools and medicine to heal us, right? Would he not have also given us the tools to become better stewards of the earth? Yes, genetic companies have done things I disagree with, but we need to start thinking about how to adapt to climate change, and conventional breeding may be too slow to bring about crops that can handle rising temps and less water. Your comments?
Great question. And this again is part of the public relations talking points that have been spewed out for a generation. It turns out that the process of genetic engineering is based on fundamentally flawed principles of GMOs. It came about when we still thought, some people thought, one gene produces one protein, produces one trait. It turns out very few traits are produced from one protein, from one gene. Genes act in concert with other genes as networks or families, and we have not yet cracked the code on that complicated form of interaction. And so the biotech industry got lucky with herbicide tolerance and the production of Bt toxin. But for things like higher yield, salt tolerance, drought tolerance, and using less water, that requires interactions of genes that we don't yet understand. And so selective breeding has been far greater and more successful and quicker in producing those type of traits. And this is verified by the companies themselves. I think it was the head of Syngenta that said, yeah, selective breeding beats GMOs every time in these things. In fact, there's a concept that GMOs will feed the world. It's nonsense. It doesn't actually even increase yield. Whereas agroecology, the kind of stuff that you promote, can increase yields by 100% in developing nations, even 200%, depending on the study and the location and the crop. And GMOs on average reduce yield, according to USDA reports, according to Union of Concerned Scientists, independent research, et cetera, et cetera. So the process of genetic engineering could theoretically, at some time in the future, be used predictably and safely to increase the yield, to do these type of things that this person said, to make things drought tolerant, salt tolerant, and use less water. Right now, the GMOs on the Midwest require twice the amount of water. In fact, if you look during the drought and you looked at the Roundup Ready soybeans or corn next to the non-Roundup Ready or soybeans or corn, and it's at the time of the drought, the stuff that was non-GMO did phenomenally better, sometimes 100 bushels per acre better than the one right next to it, because the one right next to it was dying more easily because it required more water. So it's a failed technology. Even the herbicide tolerance is failing because the weeds have outsmarted Monsanto and are now resistant in half of the farmland. The bugs are now resistant to the Bt toxin in more and more states. So it's a failed technology. The promise is still there. Maybe eventually, possibly, we could do it. And for that reason, I'm not against continuing to do research. But who's going to do the research? Is it going to be a private company that takes a patent when they discover something, that is forced to release the product before the patent expires, long before the science is ready and the technology is safe? Or is it going to be public money that will push it forward at an appropriate level and do safety research at the same time? So far, we've had no responsible research in this area that allows the technology to be deployed at an appropriate pace. The independent scientists that I know all around the world all agree that it was put on the market long before the science was ready. Maybe it'll never be ready, maybe it will be, but not yet.
I mean, I agree with that, actually. I'm for responsible technology use, and when the science is done properly, I'm all for GMOs, so don't get me wrong on that point. I'm all for advancement, but on the same token, what we need to do is look towards our ancestors and agroecology and how our ancestors grew food successfully for thousands of years. The terra preta soil with the biochar and building the soil. I mean, another thing, the GMOs and the glyphosate and the pesticides and the chemical synthetic fertilizers do is they ruin the soil. they turn it into dust, the Dust Bowl in middle America, right? I mean, what we need to do is build the soil, because if you have healthier soil, you have healthier yields, plants that need less water, plants that yield more, and you put good nutrients in the soil, like I recommend to you guys, you have more nutritious crops, and this is truly the answer. We have the technology. The technology is already existing on Earth. We just need to revisit the old ways. We always want to create something new, but what the old ways really works if you do it right, and that's what I teach you guys on my show. So Jeffrey, another thing that some people say is that there's like 1,800 studies that say GMOs are safe, and there's prestigious scientific organizations that say they're safe. I mean, what's the truth about this?
Well, let's start with these prestigious organizations. The FDA allows it on the market, so how could it be so bad? Well, we said that the FDA scientists said that there was danger, and the political appointees overruled them. They ignored them. Why was that? The White House had instructed the FDA to promote GMOs. That's why. And so they hired Michael Taylor to be in charge of policy at the FDA. Michael Taylor was Monsanto's attorney. Monsanto's the biggest GMO company. He was in charge of the policy that said no safety studies are needed, no labeling is needed, and he also allowed bovine growth hormone, Monsanto's genetically engineered drug for cows, on the market. And then he became Monsanto's vice president. And then he became the FDA's food safety czar under the Obama administration. So there's a lot of organizations like that, a lot of them. American Association for the Advancement of Science was headed by a pro-GMO cheerleader. The USDA Secretary, Tom Vilsack, was the Biotech Governor of the Year. We have so many people in government and also in academia and in key regulatory agencies that have direct ties to the industry. And if they don't have them in the past, they may have them in the future, like the person who was in charge of the Biotech Approval Committee for Europe ended up becoming a vice president of Syngenta, one of the top 5 GMO companies. So we can't just look to alphabet organizations and say, well, if they approved it, we could approve it too. And we can't just say, oh, they have 1,800 studies. If you look at those 1,800 studies, the vast majority of them have nothing to do with safety. They're commercial studies. They look at the weight gain of chickens and things like that have nothing to do with whether it's going to influence our health or our children, etc. And when you look at those 1,800 studies, who put them together, people who are trying to force the conclusion of safety, because the ones that show problems are mysteriously left out. And there's even some that are in that compilation of so-called safety-proving studies that show serious problems. And so they just put it together in order to have these sound bites. And it's the sound bites that end up being, ricocheted around in a chorus that's constructed of these people that have these front groups and have these highly credentialed titles saying the same thing, so we must believe it's true. But if you drill down even slightly below the surface, you find that it's all a charade.
Wow. And what about the claim that there's we've been modifying plants for 10,000 years and GMO is just a new way of modifying plants?
That's the other one. We mentioned that, and it's a talking point. And I remember asking Dr. Belinda Martineau, who actually was a scientist on the first genetically engineered crop, the Flavor Saver tomato. We were at a public forum. I said, so Belinda, is GMO just an extension of natural breeding? And she rolled her eyes and said, no, of course not. And yet there are some scientists that will repeat that dutifully.
Mm-hmm. So why are GMOs being allowed to be grown and sold in the USA, but many other countries have banned them or passed minimally labeling laws?
Well, the government is still deciding that they want to promote GMOs. It's still the official policy of the FDA. It's the official policy of the EPA and the USDA and the State Department. If you look at the WikiLeaks, it shows how the ambassadors of various countries are calling on Washington to put pressure on Brussels and to create up a retaliation list against countries to cause some pain so that they stop rejecting GMOs. They're paying for reporters to be flown to the US to be taught by Monsanto how to report on GMOs. It's a complete travesty when you look at what the government is doing. And I remember speaking to a senior government official, and I told them, no, GMOs are not the same. The scientists at the FDA all believe that. And she stopped and said, but that's the entire basis of US policy on GMOs. Yeah, that's right. It's all based on a lie.
So we covered if GMOs will feed the planet, but what about the GMO technology that's going to put beta carotene in rice so that people that are malnourished in foreign countries can now get beta carotene in rice?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. If this rice ever turns out to be effective, it doesn't mean that we should embrace the technology completely and say, oh, it's okay to be eating Monsanto's herbicide because a different product altogether is saving children. Will golden rice save children? Very, very unlikely. First of all, using a primitive, destructive, and disruptive technology, so you may end up increasing the amount of beta-carotene in the rice and causing all sorts of allergens, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems, just as the FDA scientists predicted. And it's not being evaluated at all, and there was even a feeding trial in China where they didn't have the proper informed consent and never did the studies even on animals before they fed them to humans, and never fully evaluated the content of the product. So it was a complete travesty. There was some firings in China, and there was suspensions or whatnot in the United States. So if you look at David Schubert of the Salk Institute's article on GMOs and a new generation of GMOs, he talks about how this particular change is an example of a technology that might be far more dangerous than the GMOs that are already on the market, because you're changing active principles in the crop, and you might end up creating changes in the retinoic acid, which is part of that pathway. That's the word I couldn't think of before. Retinoic acid, which is linked to certain diseases and birth defects. And so in producing a change in the beta-carotene, you're very likely to produce a change in the retinoic acid, and very likely to promote or have a potential to promote other diseases, and this is not being looked at. So you're creating changes in active metabolic pathways that produce very active compounds that are important for growth and also very dangerous. Now you also have beta-carotene, which is supposed to be up-leveled to vitamin A, so it's used by these vitamin A deficient children. In order to do that, you typically need fat in the diet. Well, these same children don't have much fat in their diet, and so there's no proof of principle that it'll ever actually provide the vitamin A needed. And there are other methods to provide vitamin A which don't carry these risks and have already been proven to be safe. Growing gardens, providing sweet potatoes, providing other products, providing a complete and balanced diet, so you're not just doing a silver bullet approach for one particular lack of nutrient, but an entire basis for overcoming malnutrition and increasing balanced nutrition. So we have a situation where they spent $100 million. It still hasn't proven to have good enough yields to deploy. It's still not ready, even if there were no objections to it. It's still never been tested for efficacy or safety. And you can feed 2 pills a year with high mega doses of vitamin A at a cost of $0.05 a year to children and prevent blindness. So this is the poster child. This is the poster child of the biotech industry, and you can see why.
Well, I mean, to me, it sounds like smoke and mirrors, like that guy in New York City that's like, okay, what cup is the ball underneath totally tricks you, right? It sounds like that, because, I mean, I think they're kind of like saying, oh, yeah, this could be this, but it's totally not. And, I mean, I think it's far easier to grow some carrots or grow some sweet potatoes, right? Sweet potatoes actually grow in high heat, and they're pretty tolerant of all kinds of stuff, and add nutrients to the soil to grow higher quality food. I mean, just, in some of the studies I've seen with just using standard chemical fertilizers, right? Nutrition could be half as much, minerals could be half as much. You could have twice as much protein in the same given carrot if you're growing in a nutrient-dense fashion, given the plant and building the soil, giving it what it needs, instead of growing nutritionally deficient foods, using chemical fertilizers, Roundup and GMOs and all this kind of stuff. So in my opinion, it's much better to just get back to nature and use nature to benefit you, right? There's so many different new varieties of naturally bred tomatoes that are high in anthocyanidins and all kinds of stuff, and they're able to do this naturally. Let's talk about that. Let's kind of move more into the whole gardening realm and GMOs, because I know a lot of my viewers out there, I mean, people are scared. Either they don't care about GMOs, either they think they're fine, or they're like, they're indifferent, or they're like really scared, like, everything in the grocery store is a GMO. Every plant that I go to buy at Home Depot is a GMO. Like, what's the truth about this, Jeffrey? Like, is every plant that you could buy, like at Home Depot or Lowe's or your local nursery that a home garden would buy, is that GMO? Is it going to be GMO?
Mercifully not. I don't know much about the non-food plants. There's not a lot of non-food plants that you can grow for gardens that are genetically engineered, but it hasn't been my area. But for food plants, if you look at the list of those that are commercialized, it's the same list for the seeds that you can buy. And you'd have to look out for yellow squash and zucchini. And it may not even mention that it's genetically engineered. There's corn on the cob, which corn usually mentions, or almost always, maybe always mentions that it's genetically engineered. And I don't know if there's a variety for home growers of genetically engineered corn. It's usually for farmers, but I'd look out for that. And because it cross-pollinates, I would get a certificate from the seed producer that they've tested that particular batch and what the results of that test were for GMO contamination for corn. Papaya wouldn't be a problem unless you're in Hawaii or growing seeds that you picked up in Hawaii or China. And then the others, you wouldn't be growing cotton, you wouldn't be growing canola. Sugar beets are for sugar and not for eating, regular beets. You won't be growing soy in your garden. So alfalfa is also used for, animal hay primarily. So you're not going to end up facing the issue right now, but the biotech industry's stated goal is to genetically engineer 100% of all commercial seeds. That is their goal. They wanted to do that by now. In fact, in a 1999 conference in San Francisco, there was a white paper circulating projecting a 95% replacement of all commercial seeds by 2004. Now, what turned that around, or at least derailed that fast track schedule, was the gag order being lifted on a scientist in Europe 3 weeks later, where he was able to speak about the dangers of GMOs, and he was the world's greatest scientist in his field, and he was being given the task to figure out how to test for the safety of GMOs, and until he discovered the problem, he was a pro-GMO scientist. It was a perfect setup for a whistleblower, and he was about to blow the whistle 7 months earlier and got fired and gagged and defamed. And when his gag order was lifted, over 700 articles were written in the UK press alone. Within 10 weeks, the tipping point of consumer rejection was achieved in Europe, as evidenced by the April 27th announcement by Unilever that they weren't going to use any more GMOs in its European brands. And then Nestle said the same thing the next day, and then everyone else said the same thing the next week. European brands, because that's where the high-profile food safety scandal hit the headlines, not in the United States, where it was all covered up. So it was consumers reacting against GMOs that changed the marketplace, that eliminated their risk because they expressed their concern. That's what's happening in the United States. It happened already in the natural products industry. That was tipped in 2013. It's now making its way through the conventional food industry. Similac baby infant formula just introduced a non-GMO brand. As that skyrockets, the others are going to have to do the same, and that's going to end up happening with the baby food and the breakfast cereal, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to see a tipping point here. The Institute for Responsible Technology, my organization, has been helping to engineer that by telling people the truth about GMOs. We could use your help on that. We can use your help in many ways. So I'm going to take this moment to do that. If you go to responsibletechnology.org, sign up for our newsletter so we can stay in touch with you. You can become part of our Tipping Point network of about 10,000 activists in North America, getting the information out, boots on the ground wise. You can learn how to speak on GMOs. We've taught close to 1,500 people how to speak on GMOs. We have an online speaker training course. You can make a donation. We have a 5-year master plan to eliminate GMOs, which is very much needing your support to help us activate the targeted demographic group education that we need to drive GMOs completely out of the supermarket, and then animal feed as a follow-up. So we are confident that we can do it because we've seen the changes. I've been working on this for 19 years, and I've never seen such changes. 40% of Americans already say they're avoiding or reducing GMOs, up from 15% in 2007. Most Americans, at least 3/4, 2 years ago, were concerned about GMOs. The other side knows that their castles built in the air are going to crash. They're spending millions of dollars on public relations, which is totally vacuous, and yet we have now thousands and thousands of people who are removing GMOs from their diet and reporting to others and to us at the Institute and to their doctors how much better they're feeling, and the symptoms are going away. I have a film, Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives, which is quite popular and available at geneticroulettemovie.com, but a new film is going to come out with actual testimonials and case studies of families that switched to non-GMO, and what happened was amazing.
Yeah, I want to encourage you guys to switch if you haven't already switched. So Jeffrey, it's becoming quite apparent that people are more and more aware of the GMO issue, and is it true that actually the USDA just came out with some kind of like non-GMO label now?
Well, the USDA, it's kind of leaked information that they're going to have a verification program probably for grains and whatnot. We don't know how good it is. The non-GMO project is the way to go right now. I very much doubt that the USDA's standards will meet ours as consumers, but it's possible. Non-GMO is becoming so popular that I expect all the major food companies to switch to non-GMO in the next couple of years. So they're going to want to verify it for consumers, because if they simply put non-GMO on the side of their package like Cheerios, I called up Cheers and said, what do you mean by non-GMO? What's your standard? They said, we can't tell you. So, okay, fine. I'll go to Grape Nuts that has a non-GMO project verified label on the front, and I'll know exactly what they do, or I'll personally go organic. But the other thing is to avoid glyphosate or Roundup. It's not just important to avoid GMOs now because they use Roundup as a ripening agent on wheat, barley, rye, oats, sweet potatoes, lots of berries and whatnot, fruits and vegetables. So buying organic is more important than ever before because they sometimes spray this ripening agent, glyphosate, on crops just 3 days before harvest. And of course, it's just sitting inside the food portion that we eat. So the highest priority is to avoid GMOs. And if you can at all buy organic, and certainly what you grow yourself would even be better, go for that. And especially children who are most at risk. And we're in fact going to launch a campaign on Roundup. If you go to responsibletechnology.org, by the time this is out, our campaign should be in place. And we're providing a lot of training and information and materials to be active locally. So join the Tipping Point Network and you'll get everything you need.
So how can somebody get a hold of your website once again and learn about that campaign on the Roundup?
Responsibletechnology.org will give you that information. To watch the film Genetic Roulette, you can go from there, or geneticroulettemovie.com will bring it to you directly. And to help you avoid GMOs, go to nongmoshoppingguide.com with over 31,000 products verified as non-GMO by the Non-GMO Project, and other tips and tricks to avoid GMOs in the supermarket and in the restaurants.
Yeah, I want to encourage you guys to eat non-GMO. I mean, the easiest ways, very simply, are number one, go organic. Organic shouldn't have any GMOs in there unless there's some cross-pollination contamination, which hopefully is small, if any. Get something that's non-GMO project verified, that has the non-GMO project verified label. Don't believe any other claims because they may not be substantiated or verified. And of course, eat things out of your own garden that you could grow yourself, and start with good, wholesome seeds. And of course, grow the most nutrient dense foods you can, because in my opinion, I got into gardening, growing my food, and this whole health journey because I almost lost my life when I was younger, right? I don't want that to happen to you. And there's all these pitfalls that may get you, and the GMOs is probably just one of them. So yeah, I want to thank you for having you out today, Jeffrey. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. I may have some more episodes on the GMOs in the future. Other than that, we're going to get back to gardening and show you guys how to grow the best food on the planet. So if you haven't already checked me out, be sure to check my past episodes. I have over 1,050 episodes now on how to grow your own food at home. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of my upcoming episodes. I have some really cool, exciting episodes where I get some bumblebees for pollination and all kinds of cool other stuff happening. So once again, my name is John Kohler with growingyourgreens.com. We'll see you next time. And remember, until then, keep on growing.
Safe eating.
All right, this is John Kohler with growingyourgreens.com to do another exciting episode for you. And this episode is probably my last episode from Hawaii. So a hui ho. And that's because I'm actually headed out on a plane tonight. And this is a property I rented actually for the week, VBRO or